Hello, it's time for us to continue with cells. Today we're going to delve deeper into one of the most important parts of the cell for our class, the cell membrane. So let's get on to that. So, quick recap. Cells are the smallest unit of all living organisms. There's two main types of cells, the prokaryotic and the eukaryotic. The prokaryotic don't have membrane-bound organelles, and eukaryotic do. And they also don't have a nucleus to house their DNA. They do have DNA, but it's floating freely throughout the cell, whereas the eukaryotic cells have their DNA information housed in their nucleus. Cells are comprised of organelles, and today we're going to focus on one of those organelles, the cell membrane, which is present in both the prokaryotic cells and the eukaryotic cells. So the structure of the cell membrane is actually quite simple. It follows something called a fluid mosaic model. So a mosaic model here includes cholesterol, proteins, carbohydrates, and phospholipids. So if you look at the cell membrane picture, this is what it looks like. You have these little phospholipids, or the little heads and tails they have here. That's what they're called. The head is the little circle part, and the tails are what drops from beneath them or above them. These phospholipids are the main structure of our cell membrane. It's mainly what it's made out of, right? That's the important part. That is what is going to allow things to go in and out of the cell. Like we said in our last video, the function of the cell membrane is to regulate what can come in and out of the cell. Now, within these phospholipids, sometimes you'll bump into these things within the tail area of the phospholipid, so inside the two layers of heads. These little structures are cholesterol, and the cholesterol helps with the fluidity of the things going in and out of the cell, right? It's just a little helper. The carbohydrates sometimes are latched on to the heads of these phospholipids or to the proteins. Now, these proteins kind of take up a lot of space and within the two layers of the phospholipids. This protein is what's going to be helping to transport molecules in and out that need to go through this layer, right? Through this, these two layers actually of the cell membrane to get in and out of the cell. Sometimes they're like pumps, and so they're able to grab something from outside, put it in, or vice versa. Now, it is important that you notice this is a bilayer, so it's a layer of two rows of phospholipids. So when something's outside of the cell, it's called extracellular. When it's inside of the cell, in the internal environment, so this is the outside of the cell, this is the inside of the cell. The inside's called intracellular. So again, those prefixes, extra means outside, intra, inside. So these two layers are what's protecting the cell. It's kind of a double gate, right? Making sure things can't get in and out. Oh, that's called gate. Like a double fence. And then these proteins work as gates, letting things come in or out. Now, when there is no cholesterol in this phospholipid bilayer, it's a much more rigid structure. It's not as fluid, it's not as flexible, so it's easier to break those cell membranes. Also, if it doesn't have cholesterol and it's very hot, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to be too fluid. The phospholipids aren't going to be tightly packed together, and so it won't hold its shape, and it's going to be so flexible that things are easier to get in and out of the cell, right? It's not serving its function as properly. The cholesterol is able to regulate the temperature a little bit and help that. So this is what each phospholipid looks like within that bilayer, that double layer. Bi, remember, means two. So the head of the phospholipid is called a hydrophilic head because it likes water. So it's made up of a phosphate and a glycerol. And then the tail is hydrophobic. So remember from our biomolecules, the hydrophobic molecule is the lipid, right? Those oils, those fatty acids don't like water. So these tails are going to be hydrophobic because they are made of fatty acid. So up here, we have the phosphate, making this a phospholipid. If you remember clearly from our biomolecules, we had the glycerol and we had the fatty acid. Now we're adding this phosphate here within the hydrophilic head, which just kind of separates the liking water and hating water portions of our phospholipid. Our cell membrane, remember, has two layers of these. So the important thing is that they are paired up by having the tails towards each other. So we have head, tails, tails, head. That is the setup of our phospholipid bilayer. That is because we want the hydrophilic regions, the heads, which love the water, both towards the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell. Because outside of the cell, sometimes you have a lot of fluids, right? Where the cells are floating in. And then inside of the cell, we have the cytoplasm. So we need that to be okay. And that means that the area that touches the cytoplasm needs to be okay with water, and the area that touches the outside also needs to be okay with water. So the heads are both facing the extracellular part and the intracellular part. Now the middle part is where all the fatty acid tails that don't like the water are located. Okay? This is what it kind of looks like. So again, extracellular means outside, intracellular, inside the cell. So right here we would have the cytoplasm, and out here would be whatever liquid the cell is floating around in. Okay, and again, the head, hydrophilic, likes water. Hydrophobic tails don't like water. Now, our cell membrane is called a semi-permeable membrane. That means only certain things are allowed to go through. Semi, if you remember from your prefixes, means kind of. And so semi-permeable, it's kind of permeable. So some things can go in and out and others can't. Now, why is that important? We need to maintain homeostasis. So homeostasis means equilibrium. It means balance. We need to achieve balance within the cell. So we can't have too much of anything. Remember, excess of anything can be harmful, and we don't want too little of something. So this selective permeability, this ability to detect what needs to be inside and outside and accommodate to that, is the function of our cell membrane. So some of the things that can go in and out of the cell are some small nonpolar molecules. We also have some very small polar molecules that sometimes can go through, depending on what we need. Some large polar molecules like glucose and sucrose. Sometimes we need more energy to go into the cell to be able to have some of the other organelles function properly. Now, ions are not able to go through. So you see how they get turned back. So again, we need a phospholipid bilayer because we need to be able to protect our cell from anything trying to get in, right? For example, viruses and bacteria that want to reproduce in our cells and make us sick, our cells need to protect against that, right? So that's one of our defense lines. It also needs to regulate what comes in and out in order to keep homeostasis, to keep balance, equilibrium. That is the main function. It also helps provide some structure or shape to, keep everything in that cytoplasm housed. And it also helps on cell-to-cell recognition. So you are able to identify molecules that are trying to get in or out of the cell, like carbohydrates, like glucose and others that we mentioned earlier. So these are our four main functions of the phospholipid bilayer cell membrane. Final picture, remember, outside of the cell, extracellular, inside of the cell, intracellular. The actual cell membrane is composed of 2 layers of phospholipids with both the outside facing heads and inside facing heads. And in between, we have the 2 layers of tails. We have protein channels that allow things to go through the cell easier. We have carbohydrate chains there and some cholesterol helping with fluidity. The region that faces the outside and the inside of the cell, the heads, is called a hydrophilic region because they like water. And the tails, the inner part of the cell membrane, are hydrophobic. They do not like water. They are made of fatty acids. Fat or lipids don't like water. Now, some of these proteins embedded in the membrane have different purposes, right? So we have transmembrane proteins. Those are very, very important. Those are embedded into the cell membrane that are going to allow large molecules to get through, okay? Then we have the channel proteins. Those are the ones that are going to allow the smaller molecules to go through quickly. Sometimes, they have kind of a dent in between in the drawing that's labeled as a pore, as you can tell here. So these are channel proteins that allow those smaller molecules to go through. There's glycoproteins that will help with sugar cell recognition. And there's peripheral proteins located on the outside layer that aid in transportation and signaling from cell to cell recognition. All cells have a cell membrane. It is a selective permeable membrane, semi-permeable membrane, allowing some things to go through and not all. It is a phospholipid bilayer because there's 2 layers and it has proteins embedded. This phospholipid bilayer has hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions, which is what makes it semi-permeable. So some things that are hydrophilic are able to go through and some things that are hydrophobic are able to go through. So and some proteins in the cell membrane serve as channels or pumps that allow the larger or impermeable molecules to cross through the membrane. So the things that don't like the phospholipids are able to go through the channels if we need them in the body, in the cell. And that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions during class, and I will see you then. Bye.